In this course, I was most interested in learning about the ways in which archives and records repositories are responding to the increasing production of information and records as technology makes the production of information easier. I was also interested in the ways in which these traditionally siloed institutions are competing with freely available information on the internet. In this presentation, I document many of the barriers that prevent archivists and records managers from processing their collections and connecting their records to interested users. Many records and archives management practices developed at a time in which the amount of records produced was manageable and repositories could feasibly consider keeping everything. In an ideal world, we would keep everything, fully describe records, preserve items indefinitely, and digitize all records and documents. The current reality is that repositories are often completely overwhelmed by the significant and increasing amount of records and a lack of staff and funding. Records and archives managers must factor time and resources into their processes and best practices, resulting in conflict in appraisal and disposition policies, preservation and digitization practices, and a variety of other records management activities. The first step in managing records is determining what is essential. According to Patricia Franks, essential records are those necessary to protect the rights and interests of the organization and individuals, as well as those necessary for emergency operations. Extra care must be taken to preserve these records. Records managers deal with overload by creating a plan to remove unneeded records in a timely and orderly way. A records retention and disposition schedule sets in place policies that categorize records and determine the length of their usefulness and the appropriate time at which they may be discarded if such a time exists. This automates decision making in a busy records repository and keeps records organized and accessible. One of the many ways that archives and records repositories avoid being overwhelmed by documents is creating an appraisal process that allows them to avoid acquiring irrelevant records. Many archives receive items at the behest of their creator. This is especially true for personal papers. Records like this are unpredictable and require a unique approach. Some would consider it best practice to keep every record generated. This has the benefit of avoiding biased destruction of records that may be unfavorable to interested parties and creating a simplified appraisal process in which items do not need to be evaluated. The reality for most modern repositories is that keeping everything is virtually impossible. Items that are valuable are not of equal value to every institution. An archive or records repository must have a clear mission in order to avoid collecting items that do not serve the users or that inhibit the archive's ability to properly acquire and process the items that are valuable to their users. Stricter appraisal criteria can help institutions avoid collecting inappropriate records, but the more time spent conducting appraisals, the more of a backlog is created. Archival description involves the creation of finding aids that establish relevant details about collections or items. Finding aids include details like the creator of an item, the title, relevant dates, subjects, and locations, and other pieces of information that provide access and context for items. Description can be an intensive process if an institution is determined to include item level description and specific details about an item. Archives attempt to create an efficient descriptive process by describing records only at the collection level and avoiding item level description. As the users of archives are more likely to be researchers who have the skills and motivation to sort through a collection, the user is allowed to do a lot of the discovery that an archive does not do. Archival description practices have been complicated by the internet and the democratization of information, and archives are under more pressure to digitize their items and share their records with other institutions. This adds pressure to the already daunting task of records description by requiring the creation of finding aids that are friendly to users who may not be experienced researchers and may be finding archival records through the semantic web. Archival description has a lot of potential for creating access to siloed information and broadening the user base, but doing so requires an amount of labor that is staggering for the many archival institutions that operate with limited funding and staff. Many users would be thrilled to find more archival items digitized and accessible online, but digitization is very time consuming. There are also many legal considerations when digitizing and sharing records, and digitizing requires training and equipment that can be costly and time consuming to obtain. In order to serve their users and use their time and resources wisely, archival managers can prioritize items that are in disrepair or in high demand. Most archives and records management facilities are dealing with more records than they can reasonably manage, and the lack of funding and staffing for these organizations is a crisis. This crisis requires both advocacy for better support and commitment to efficient processes in order to serve users and compete in an oversaturated information landscape. An ideal collection is probably not achievable under the current pressures, but archivists and records managers can examine every step of their process to find the precise actions and policies that increase efficiency while providing quality, accessible records.